probably know him. I'll just say one thing really quickly. If anyone has ideas for programs for 2025, our meeting where we figure out what programs to have starting in January is happening relatively soon. We always say that, like, we've been doing this for so many years that, at some point we're going to run out of, ideas for programs, but we never do. And usually when we have to sit around and come up with kind of 9 program ideas, we usually start with 20 or 25 and then whittle it down to 9. But if anyone has ideas, like some aspect of Millbrook history that you're interested in, some speaker maybe that you heard in some other venue who you thought was really good, please let us know, right? Email us, talk to us after the program, right? We'd love to have that information. All right? All right, I will turn it over to esteemed town and village historian, Peter Devers.
Samhain. Have you ever heard that name? You probably have read it. It's spelled S-A-H, or S-A-H-E-I-N, or S-A-N-H-E-I-N, Samhain. But if you're Irish, as I found out, I'm 98% or 100% Celtic, which is 98% Irish, and for humility's sake, 2% Scottish. So the word is pronounced that way because the Irish did want to fool the British. What it is a very pagan festival of the Irish Celtic people that we have turned into Halloween. It's the night between the death of summer and the arrival of winter, or yes, the death of summer and the arrival of winter. And from the evening of October 31st until the sun comes up on the 1st of November, the wall between the physical world and the spiritual world weakens, and it allows the spirits of the dead to come across and haunt us. So this talk here is actually going to be sort of a public service announcement telling you what cemeteries not to go anywhere near on Halloween. I mean, you're all familiar with the major ones: Nine Partners Cemetery, St. Joseph's, Washington Hollow, and St. Peter's. But these are sort of unknown ones. So I've written down a few notes here, which I'll read to you. The Haight family burying ground, which is located on Killearn Road. A long winding driveway heading eastwards off Killearn Road, uphill, passes through the lovely meadowlands and fields that had been farmed since the mid-1700s. These were the lands for many generations of the Haight family, a clan which played an important part in the 18th and 19th century life of Millbrook. The cemetery is located at the top of the hill, directly across from Eve Prop's front door. The earliest grave appears to be that of Lewis Haight, who died in 1842, aged 32 years and 11 months. Elias Haight, who is buried nearby, was born in 1782. His wife Deborah in 1787. She died in 1846, aged 59 years, 2 months and 27 days. The people back then were really particular about the days. Every day counted. Elizabeth Haight seems to be the longest lived of the clan that's planted up there. She was born in 1766, dying at the age of 93 years, 1 month, and 16 days in February 1859. In all, there are 17 markers for the Haight Cemetery. With modern building techniques, you can flip a couple. With modern building techniques, including insulation, central heating, and thermal pane windows, Eve could comfortably build her house on the top of the hill and not worry about the cold and winds and storms of all the sorts. The Haights were practical for their era, however, and they built their dwelling at the bottom of the hill. That's the foundation of the original Haight house, which Eve discovered when she started her clearing work. And she turned it into a very presentable ruin, which you can see right from the road. Behind it is the root cellar, an 18th century root cellar, the refrigerator of the day. And you can walk up to it and look right down to it. And that's where they stored all the vegetables and foods that they prepared to last them through the winter. In the front yard of the house, that's the root cellar. Okay. In the front yard of the house is the original colonial hand-dug well that the Haights drank from during their century-plus residence. You could still pump water from that pump. The pump itself is probably 19th century. Originally, it was probably a bucket that just went down on the end of a rope. But this is modernization for the Haights. And as I say, it's right in their front yard. If you want to make lemonade with 18th century well water, just call up Eve Prop and she'll let you come up and bring a jug so you can take some water home with you. Run it through a Brita water filter so that it's pure. One distressing note about the Haights of Killearn Road. About 40 years ago, I hiked the stretch from where Eve Prop's driveway is, heading southeastward. And in the brush on the southeast side of the road, I saw two gravestones. In the middle looked like nowhere. And I walked into the gravestones, and they were both of Haight people. I believe one was Andrew Haight, and I wondered why he was down here on Killearn Road when the road named after him is up north of Mavisville. There may be two Andrew Haights. There's another Haight next to him. And I didn't really think a whole lot about it. I just went on my way. But about 3 weeks ago, I went back there looking to see if I could find them to take a photograph to add in here, and couldn't find it. The brush was still thick with leaves and very dense, so I didn't want to push in there because of the tick problem. But I'll go back, after the leaves are down to see if I can spy it. But then driving home, I got the awful thought. In those 40 years, about 6 houses have built along that stretch. And I'm fearful that someone got a little spooked about having tombstones in their front yard and may have taken them away or buried them someplace. But I'll try and find out. So the Haights had that cemetery, but of course, they were such a large clan that they're like buried all over the place. One of the Haights had a tavern at the end of Killearn Road that he got a license for back in the, around 1810, I believe it was. And the license from Dutchess County came with, or what became Dutchess County from the king, said that he could serve liquor and he could board people, but he couldn't have any dice games, dart games, card games, women of ill repute, and things like that. So I don't know how much fun his tavern was, but that was actually, I found out, the legalese for all the taverns in what became Dutchess County. So, okay. Go to the next one. The Northrop family burial ground. This cemetery is hidden in plain sight, but only if you're a parishioner of St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lithgow. You take the driveway off Deep Hollow Road behind the church and you'll see it right there in front of you. There are 76 burials in this ground, mostly all of the Northrop family with possibly a few collateral lot of relatives and a smattering of friends. The first Northrop to arrive in the New World was Joseph Northrop, here in Connecticut in 1637. The earliest stone in this cemetery is that of Hannah Tabor, the wife of Peleg Tabor, who died October 2nd, 1777, aged 41. She was born in 1736, the same year that Ben Franklin built the first volunteer fire company in Philadelphia. John Wharton is there. He was born in 1730, the same year that Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, who was so important in the success of our revolution, was born. Samuel Northrop, a farmer and owner of a grist mill and sawmill, is there, alongside his wife Mary Benham, whose relatives are still immortal today, and many of their 13 children. I first visited the cemetery around 1980 and was shocked at how badly the stones have deteriorated since then. When I went there 4 weeks ago, more stones had toppled over from what I remembered, and the inscriptions on so many were now totally obliterated by acid rain and the actions of hungry mold. I looked for the markers of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington Northrop, twins born in August 1840 to John L. and Sybil Northrop. Though I found them easily years ago, I couldn't locate them this time around. Twins are magical beasts, quite rare, especially in a small community as Millbrook in the town of Washington was then. And their parents must have had great hopes for them. You can almost imagine them as adventurous boys, hunting rabbits and deer in the Lithgow fields, racing their horses against each other and their neighbors, heeding Lincoln's call later in life to preserve the Union when aged 19 and 20, marrying the most beautiful girls in the township, and living into the 20th century. Such was not to be, however, as both died in the year of their birth, aged 5 months and 16 days, diphtheria. John Northrop was a farmer who supplemented his income by boarding indigent people from time to time. From the Town of Washington Poor Book, we see the entry to Captain John Northrop for the keeping of Palmer, 3 weeks at $2 per week, $6, October 9, 1822. There was no poorhouse or county infirmary in Millbrook, in Town of Washington at that time. The most important civic leader in the town for 3 decades of the first half of the 19th century, Daniel Northrop, is there. He was Dutchess County Justice of the Peace at least in 1814 through 1818 and other years thereabouts. He was also the Commissioner of Common Schools for the town of Washington from 1815 through 1836. Daniel reported that there were 12 school districts in the town in 1815, teaching 372 children out of the 551 residing here. 2 years later, in 1817, he reported there were now 13 school districts with 566 children being educated out of 629. Daniel Northrop was also a supervisor of the town of Washington. And as such, he served on the County Board of Supervisors, which was our government until the 1960s. He served on that, let's see. Yeah, he served on that probably about 20 years. No records of how long he was supervisor in the town of Washington have been found. They don't exist prior to 1866. Where the records went, they must have been kept, no one knows. But we'll be able to find out his term as supervisor because I think the county has a list of all the members of the Board of Supervisors. And so if he was on the county board, he was the supervisor of our town. So that's one of our investigative tasks here. Daniel Northrop's tombstone broke apart near the base many years ago. It's propped up but leaning to the south. While our town does not have the funds, you can go through some of those. While our town does not have the funds to restore all the broken tombstones in the cemeteries, perhaps monies might be allocated to our highway department to restore this singular one, given what Northrop meant to this place during his lifetime. He gave a lot of himself to our brethren in the past, and we should be able to give back a little to him in the present. That's his signature. That's his commissioner's report for 1815, which is down in our archives. That's his tombstone. You can see at the bottom where it's broken and it's been propped up. That's his wife. Behind every great man, there's a great woman, and she is literally buried about 20 feet behind her husband. That's his footstone, I think. The next cemetery is one that you've heard a bit about, called Briar Hill. It's the last place, the last resting place of possibly 1,000 people, making it one of the largest cemeteries, if not the largest, in the town of Washington. People buried there were buried between the years 1864 and 1955. Let's see. There are 831 known graves there. 530 were detected with finding equipment, and only 292 were found to be marked with small cylindrical stones. This is the trailhead, or the trail which Dutchess County Public Works cleared beautifully. It's a wonderful walk. From the trailhead, it's an 8-minute walk uphill to the graveyard if you're 30 years old, and a 12-minute walk if you're 73. The path is broad and the hike is a lovely one, and if you have a spare afternoon, you might want to take it. After the last burial in '55, the graveyard and path ceased to be maintained. For 65 years, briars grew on the ground, saplings sprouted, annual fall leaf debris covered the floor, and old trees fell. The graves, with their low concrete markers, that's at the top of the hill. Can you look, enlarge that?
Did you copy this now?
Yeah. The couple slides you saw before were at the top of the hill. There's a plaque dedicated to, or dedicated by a politician who, Mark Molinaro, the county executives, and the sentiment is nice, but I would have rather have seen it dedicated by the people of Dutchess County. But Will Tatum, who's Dutchess County official historian, did a wonderful little 3-minute video on the cemetery, which
Where is it? Peter?
Welcome to Briar Hill Cemetery, which is also the burial ground of the Dutchess County Courthouse, almshouse, and infirmary, roughly in use from the 1860s up until the 1950s. When you come to visit Briar Hill Cemetery today, the site that you see is the result of years of work by the Dutchess County Department of Public Works and by a team of dedicated researchers who came in, removed a great deal of brush and dead trees in this area, and partially graded the site in order to make it visitable, as well as building the current access route. We estimate approximately 800 people are resting at this location through ground-penetrating radar and other research led by April Esau, who's a Vassar College archaeology professor, and Jenny Beakley, who has been the absolute all-star researcher on poorhouse history for decades. We have a mixture of marked and unmarked graves, and then one actual tombstone. Every person interred here at Briar Hill Cemetery had a distinct story to tell, one that adds to the richness of Dutchess County history. Among the people who we know were buried here was Robert Schofield, who was a black man living in what is today Beacon. He enlisted in 1865 to fight in the Civil War, serving in a black regiment, and died in 1894, and was interred here somewhere on the site in a currently unmarked and unknown grave. There is only one standard form of grave marker left here. That's the marker right here for Louis B. Hubble, which you will find at the very rear of the site, the area of the oldest burials. Hubble was a farm laborer who was born out in Anemia earlier in the 19th century, worked and lived in Dutchess County all of his life until he came down in ill health late in his life, came to the county poorhouse, and unfortunately passed away here. Some years after his death, his sister came to the poorhouse, located his gravesite, and had this marker created and installed in order to commemorate him for years to come.
This is a poorhouse burial book that was only kept from 1935 on. So the people buried before that in this cemetery who don't have the little markers, you can see their numbers there, numbers on those little concrete markers. Next one. Those are the names of the people that they know. And that's the size of the marker. That's all you got if you were a poor person who happened to die in the county. Not just the poorhouse or the infirmary, but anywhere in the county. It's not known whether the deceased men and women were buried in coffins or just in shrouds. My hunch, knowing how the county budgets work, is that most were probably buried in canvas sailcloth. Interments for some buried post-1934 are marked by those numbers. And the last burial in 1905 was William Patterson. There's also a Greenwood buried here, John Greenwood. For his Eagle Scout project, Millbrook Scout Daniel Goldsmith built the kiosk that you saw that houses the cemetery information. And then the rock that you saw was dedicated by Mark Molinaro. They were stillborn twins, buried together. And you can see the row of people, how they were spaced, shoulder to shoulder. And that's the lone tombstone that a relative erected in memory of her brother. And that's the way it looks now. You would never believe there's close to 1,000 people buried, in there. So you definitely do not want to go to sleep on the ground at Halloween night. The next cemetery we'll talk about is the Wappingers Indian Burial Ground. In 1609, a group of Wappinger Indian boys were hanging out on a bluff overlooking the Chattahoochee River. Suddenly one stood up in alarm and pointed to the water. The largest canoe they had ever seen was slowly moving upstream. It was so large that full-grown men were walking around on it. It had no paddles like their dugout canoes. Instead, clouds taken from the sky hung on posts seemed to be pushing it along. Running home to their parents and telling their elders about this sight elicited glances that the boys were crazy. In 1609, it was Henry Hudson sailing up the river in the most technically advanced creation of mankind to date. His ship, the Half Moon, was still a marvel even to his native Brits and the Dutch under whose flag he sailed, who had known such ships for almost 200 years. It's no wonder the Wappingers thought it amazing. The tribe had lived on this land here in Dutchess County for over 2,000 years, and nothing like it had ever been seen. Being intelligent, the Native Americans all too soon came to understand what the Dutch and later the English were all about. At the time of Hudson's arrival, it's estimated that approximately 3,000 people comprised the Wappinger tribe. The tribe had a loosely defined territory that ranged from Wickeby and East Fishkill in the south to Hyde Park in the north, then stretching eastward through our town and the rest of Dutchess County into western Connecticut, with an isthmus going down into Putnam and Westchester counties. The tribe was semi-nomadic, forming numerous villages used for one season, then moving to another place for better hunting or planting. Over the course of several thousand years, thousands of Native Americans lived and died in this tribal area. How many of you have visited the Wappingers' burial grounds here? Just one. In the town of Washington. Okay. Well, I'll make a liar out of most of you. This is Chief Ninham, the last sachem of the Wappingers people before they were virtually extinguished. And here's the burial ground. The next one. The Troop K barracks sits on ground that was once an Indian settlement many, many years ago. Troop K was built on the old fairgrounds, and between Troop K and the fair, and before the fair, the land was all farmland, plowed up by maybe even the Boyces, I don't know. But this site had ready access to water, was of high quality soil, conducive to growing corn, beans, and other crops. Got a lot of sun all year long. And because of the diverse habitats of meadow, marsh, woodland, waterways, and the hills that came together, there was prime game habitat for mammals of many kinds. Back in the 1600s, there were even panther and wolves being hunted across this area. The Dutch and later the English actually found them so offensive they offered bounties on them. If you're a white man, your bounty was 10 shillings per proven kill. If you were an Indian, you got 5 shillings. So from the about 3,000 in 1690, by 1700, there were only an estimated 1,000 Wappingers, Indians, left. And by 1774, there were only about 300 of the Wappingers tribe left here. Daniel Ninham, whose statue you saw, was a great leader. He tried to reclaim land stolen from him by the Dutch and the English, going in so far as to travel to London to speak for the king. He wasn't allowed to speak for the king, but he did speak for commissioners, and they, being wealthy plutocrats like a Donald Trump, stuck with the Donald Trumps of that era here and said, sorry, Indians, the land is ours. We know that the Washington Hollow was a major Indian camp, in part because of Jum Safari, 1910 to 1998. As a boy, Jim acquired the nickname Jungle Jim because he was always out in the woods and the fields finding adventure in nature rather than in baseball and football and cars like his contemporaries. One of his most enjoyable activities was haunting the fields that are now Troop K and part of the carryover Arboretum after the farmers had plowed the land. In the furrows and upturned earth, Jim found many arrowheads, axe heads, small stone bowls, pounders, and even a flint knife. From boyhood to adulthood, he would go treasure hunting there, and it's evident by the amount and variety of materials he found that this was a major settlement. Burial practices amongst American Indians vary considerably from tribe to tribe, and even within tribes. It's generally thought that the Wappingers buried their dead, not communally in cemeteries, but wherever the family of the deceased thought appropriate. This might be near a stream where the deceased fished, or in a woodland where he hunted, or at the edge of a meadow where she used to gather wildflowers. I imagine quite a few of the Wappingers tribe are buried in the Washington Hollow Valley, most especially now in the lands of the carryover Arboretum. The Wappingers did not mark their places of burial in any way, not even as poorly as the county poorhouse did. So it's possible that you might even have a Wappingers burial in your own front yard. That is what that's what Charles and Margaret Dyson thought about 30 years ago when they started excavating for a swimming pool at their home on Tremont Hill. Up came the backhoe with hundreds of bone fragments. Margaret was horrified that she had violated an Indian cemetery and called in a priest to reconsecrate the desecrated grounds. The desecration was reported to the state police, as you would have to do. And they took some of the bone fragments away for analysis. Charlie and Margaret anxiously awaited the results. The report came back, not Indian, but Beagle. The Dysons had unknowingly dug into the extensive pet cemetery of one of the prior owners, Dujan Reynal, who kept packs of hounds for about 30 years on the property. The statue of Daniel Nimham was made by Michael Karoplian, who was installed in Wicopee only 2 years ago. Daniel served in the Stockbridge Regiment of the Continental Army. The Wappingers, when they were in essence extirpated by the Brits and the Dutch, moved eastward into the Stockbridge area to take up residence with Stockbridge Indians, or north to even join with some of their enemies of the Iroquois League. In the Battle at Van Cortlandt Manor, Daniel was killed and was buried under a stone cairn there, which they believe is still located. And so you can visit him in Van Cortlandt Park. So don't even go out in your backyard on Halloween because someone might be there. You can go through that. That's the area behind some of the carryover Arboretum. It was all good fertile hunting lands. One of the other aspects that made Washington Hollow so great was that off to one side, to the south side, there's a huge rock, high rock named Indian Rock. And back then, the Indians could watch for their enemies, any enemies approaching and their families down below. Unfortunately, it didn't work because in, I think it was 1643, the Dutch in alliance with the Mohawks came down, and of the 3,000 Wappingers in Dutchess County, not just Wappinger Hollow, but the whole county, 1,500 were murdered in 2 years, period. So they quickly went from a tribe that lived here for 2,000 years into a tribe that now exists in single-family units in places like Wisconsin and New Mexico. On Chestnut Ridge Road hillside, overlooking a lush and beautiful farmstead, what a lot of people here sort of refer to as the Sanders farmstead still, is the Davis Burying Ground. Once a very elegant last resting place for the family, is now one of the spookiest and most miserable places to visit when it comes to cemeteries. When first built, as you can see, the graveyard appears to be very elegant, a beautiful, expensive stone wall encased the whole plot. It was topped, as you'll see in the next picture. Well, we'll stop there for a second. You'll see from the distance it looked really great, but when you get up close, not so much. When first built, the graveyard was elegance personified. Surrounding it was a lovely stone wall topped by iron fencing. One large tree shaded it, and a carpet of blue myrtle covered the ground around all the burials. Now this fencing is obscured by vines and brush and dented by toppled trees. The iron gate is sealed shut by saplings and weeds that seem to grow up purposely to keep you from going in to see what was there. The dead belong to them. Clambering over the wall and creeping through the tangled vines, they grab at your feet, as I found out as I tried to make my way through there, tripping you probably about 3 or 4 times before I got from the one end where you could get in to the other end where the burials were. Dozens of ticks jump on you as you push your way into the thicket guarding the gravestones. It is so dark in there with little light penetrating the gloom that the shadows almost seem like ghostly spirits. If there ever was a set for a Halloween movie, that's it. You can see the growth inside there. Next one. I'll stop there for a second. There are 7 burials of the Davis family within the yard, but allowance was made for many, many more. None other than the 7 chose to be interred there, possibly because of the change of ownership of the farm. The purchasers may not have wanted to intrude on another family's cemetery. This very imposing monument is that of Leonard Davis, who died December 26, 1866, aged 52 years, 1 month, and 26 days. You'll be tested on that. The cause of death was a farming accident. Davis had been an important community leader, founding the Bank of Dover in addition to being a farmer. The inscription, which is kind of sweet, says, obviously written by Mrs. Davis, says, "Rest in peace, dear husband, thy toil and care is o'er, and I hope again to meet you where sorrow is no more." The monument was very expensive in its day, possibly the equivalent of $25,000 in today's money, and is now tipping over to the east. When Leonard's wife chose to be buried, I think she chose to be buried in 9 Partners, where she is now, because the trauma of what happened to her husband on the farm aided her for the rest of her life. She never remarried. The farm was sold months after Leonard was buried there. Even though her tombstone says there, "Rest in peace, dear husband," he didn't rest in peace because before she died, she asked her daughter to have her husband dug up 40 years after he was buried and moved to 9 Partners. So he's now sitting there beside her. So romantic, So you can go visit the Davises in clean, easy to get to 9 Partners, and not that horrible place. Keep going again. That tombstone, let's see. No, keep going. That tombstone in the most horrible cemetery actually has one of the loveliest inscriptions of all the cemeteries that I visited and looked at. Martha Davis, the wife of Joseph Davis, died April 17, 1805, aged only 36 years old. You know, an 18th century birth there. The inscription on her stone says, "A woman possessed of every solid virtue, affectionate and prudent in her family, just and obliging to her neighbors, kind and benevolent to the poor and afflicted, to the utmost extent of her stances and abilities." You almost feel like you know her, or would like to know her. The farm and the graveyard are now owned by Walbridge Farms Incorporated. Nancy Perkins, the late owner of Walbridge, was a quiet force in the maintenance and preservation and beautification of the Nine Partners Cemetery. Her decades of patronage has helped keep the place beautiful, a place people want to be in, however reluctantly. Perhaps Walbridge will one day be able to clean up the Davis ground. The carpet of myrtle is still there. The stone walls and iron paling are still there. The gravestones are still there. And what is now spooky can be made spiritual once again.
Wow.
You can go through. Fallen over tombstones. Nice 18th century engraving. The white burial ground. The white burial ground is in Mabbittsville, you know, not too far from me. When Dr. Poucher and Mrs. Reynolds visited the white burial ground on August 27, 1915, on their quest to catalog all the gravestones in Dutchess County, which they did most successfully, they recorded burials for 15 members of the White family. They characterized the condition of the cemetery as overgrown and deserted, much like the Davis Cemetery that you saw there. If you look in the center of that photograph, you can see camouflaged a tombstone. They characterize the tombstone graveyard as overgrown and deserted. The cemetery remained in this condition for another 92 years, growing worse with each passing day, as saplings, vines, shrubs, and weeds flourished and hid marker after marker. Falling trees cracked the stones, water and lichens ate away inscriptions, and the once commemorated dead died a second death. Abner White, the 8th child of William, 1683-1780, and Elizabeth Cadman White, 1684-1768, born April at Dartmouth, Bristol County, Massachusetts. He was married in 1745 in Little Compton to Ruth Brownell, daughter of Charles and Mary Brownell. The intention of their marriage was filed on the 22nd day of December, 1745. They moved to Dutchess County sometime before 1752, where we find the first mention of them, and were farmers, as were all their descendants, for over 100 years. They lived, as the inscription said back then, near the Four Corners of Mabbittsville. They died and are buried in the cemetery. Abner and Ruth had 7 children. Their son Charles, who we'll talk about, was born March 2nd, 1753. In 1994, a fellow named Larry Mills from California, a descendant of the Whites in Millbrook, visited the cemetery. He writes, "Charles White is my 4th great-grandfather, and the grave of his father Abner, that is there, is my 5th great-grandfather. I just found out that Abner is a registered patriot with the DAR." Larry's genealogical research also revealed that Abner White is a 5th-generation descendant of William White, a Mayflower passenger and the 11th signer of the very important Mayflower Compact. With his son Charles, being 6th generation, and Larry himself being the 11th generation. Whatever was left of the 19th century stone wall in 1994 when he visited was hidden under debris. The burial yard was so covered with debris that Larry could only locate 2 out of the 15 gravestones that stuff there that Poucher and Reynolds had found 79 years earlier. In 2013, Larry returned to the cemetery and was amazed at what he found. The new owners of the property, Michael Bassett and Darren Hinold, who purchased the place in June 2007, had not only restored the early 1800s farmhouse, but had put considerable effort into returning the cemetery to a respectful and beautiful condition. The stone wall was rebuilt, brush and debris were removed, and the stones were uprighted and replanted. Larry was able to document a further 3 interments, bringing the total burials to 18. He writes, the new owners did a great job of restoring the cemetery. The only problem, they took every broken stone and planted it as if it was a burial, but there are not 56 people buried there. There is a stone for Charles White that we're talking about that Larry's directly descended from, and you can see it's missing its bottom half, which is probably somewhere back behind it. So it would be good if some guy who knows gravestones could go out and remedy that. Larry concludes there could be a few more Whites buried there, but they have no proof of that. The trees there are less than 150 years old, so in all likelihood the graveyard was first established in an open meadow. At the time when the cemetery was made, virtually 90% of the town of Washington, Dutchess County, was open farmland or pasture. The cemetery is on private land, so to visit you'll have to secure permission from Michael or Darren to walk across their front lawn to reach it. Okay. There you can see the broken stone where they did mend one and puzzle it together. This is a list of the 1790 census. The red dots sort of mark the Whites who were buried here or living here at that point in the town of Washington. If you look above the top red dot on the far left, you will see a very famous name from Millbrook, Philip Hart. What the numbers mean, the first column is the number of free white males over the age of 16, and there's one, obviously Philip Hart. Number 2 are free white males under the age of 16, 4, most likely his children. Number 3, in the third column, it says 6. Those are women of any age. The next one with the dot indicates other people. And then the last one, which I know the Greenwoods know about, is 1, and that's the number of slaves that Philip Hart owned and held on his property at that time.
And Peter, you mentioned that the Whites came from Little Compton, Rhode Island, and so did Philip Hart.
Oh, they did, that's right, yeah.
He was Little
Yeah.
Compton.
Yeah. So,
Swift's there, everybody Swift, Swift Mill, is that the-
yes. Yeah, these are,
Trips.
you'll see names like Merritt and others in there that are well-known names in the town of Washington. Bob Skidmore. Probably a lot of people here knew Bob Skidmore because he didn't pass away all that long ago. only in 2022. Bob was 6 feet 4 inches tall, so you can see he barely fit in the backhoe there. Bob's, you can go to the next one. No, I'm sorry. Yeah. Bob's grandparents lived in Poquay and are buried in the closed cemetery. They had one child, Aiken Skidmore, Bob's father, whose start in life was tragic. His mother, May, died from complications of childbirth, and his father, Alfred, a tenant farmer, died when he was 9 years old. Very little in the way of life goods was left to Aiken, as is seen in a record of the goods held to him in the Dutchess County Surrogate's office. Aiken was raised by an attorney, Alfred H. Moore of Moore's Mills, and his life with the Moores, however tragically it started, appears to have been a happy and successful one. Despite his hardships, Aiken made a rousing success of his life. He married a lovely woman with the Dutch name of Trintia Selderbeck, and they were a devoted couple. In March 1929, he established an automotive supply business in Millbrook and operated it successfully for many years. In April 1952, he chaired the committee that brought Little League Baseball to Millbrook for the first time. Aiken is, sorry, I can't stop laughing when I read Aiken stuff. Aiken is best remembered for the weekly columns he wrote over 30 decades for the Mill Grain Table, titled variously, You Said It, and Needless to Say. The columns were a mixture of wry observation about the antics of his neighbors, homespun philosophy, and every so often, doggerel poetry of the most awful sort. Here are a few excerpts from Aiken's writing. My boy, Bob, did himself proud on Sunday. He poked out a hit, a run, and a Pontiac windshield. It wasn't Andy Briggs's Pontiac, but keep trying, son. 21 August 1952. On Friday, I made a long-delayed visit to Louise Tompkins, who writes the column 52 years ago this week in the Roundtable. She did her best to make me feel at home, but I am always a bit ill at ease in the presence of handicapped people. They can never quite accept me as one of their own, because thanks to my thick skull, my handicap doesn't show. August 2. So I am told only God can make a tree, but no one can neglect them like the village of Millbrook. Marriage is said to be a mutual relationship, and you all know who the man, and you all know that the man is the mute. Quit yelling about the census, she wrote in 1950. You may not live to see another one, so it may be your last chance to be counted for something. Phil Shar, our typesetter, is probably fishing somewhere in the northern waters now, and that reminds me of Phil Scale. Folks used to doubt his fishing stories, so Phil bought a scale and had his friend witness the weighing of his catches. One day, a friend got into an argument about the weight of his newborn baby, so he slipped over to Phil's house and borrowed those scales. And imagine his amazement when the kid weighed in at 34 pounds, 10 ounces. On Saturday night, Officer Jerry Donahue was alerted to the fact that illegal gambling was going on in a trailer behind the car dealership on Franklin Avenue. Officer Donahue was seen to enter the trailer at 7 p.m. and emerged 3 hours later, $10 richer. Aiken died in 1972 at the age of 66. Of him, town historian Louise Tompkins wrote, he was descended from a very old Dutchess County family, his ancestors being mentioned in nearly all of the county histories. For generation after generation, there were people of faith, industry, and honesty, with all the great concern for the communities in which they lived. In his quiet and unassuming way, Aiken was like them. Few people realize that he was also a Quaker minister of high standing in the Society of Friends. For years he wrote his lively column, The Round Table. His talent for putting words together in the most effective manner was simply fantastic and filled me with awe. A rare sense of humor was another of his many characteristics. Bob Skidmore was very close to his father and very much like the description that Louise wrote of him. At some point in time before Aiken's death, he got it into his head to create his own private family cemetery. He and Evelyn had purchased their land from Willard Sutton in '67, and he chose a secret place in the forest, well away from his house, so he could think about his dad, who would be the first entrant on the long walk to the gravesite. The plot he created is very small, as you can see, it's very small and simple, with 14-inch square flagstones serving as memorial markers. Bob carved his dad's name and later others, including his own, with a portable Dremel drill into the gray-colored rock. The savings over buying a metal casket, hiring a funeral home, a monument maker, paying a high graveyard opening fee, Brad, and paying a landscaper were enormous and made Bob a very happy man. Bob was born on March 21st, 1934, and lived his whole life, 88 years, in Millbrook. He was a college educated, served in the Army for 2 years. He had a 30-year career with IBM in Kingston and Poughkeepsie, remarking, "I don't know what I did there, but I did whatever it was well." His love and prowess for baseball, engendered by his father Aiken, saw him inducted into the Dutchess County Baseball Hall of Fame. Bob developed a passion for racing motorcycles on ice and did so until he was 80 years old. The cemetery for his family has another built alongside it. This is the guest cemetery. So far, only his best lifelong friend, hunting buddy, and whiskey drinking pal, Gene Field, has come to your side there. Go through a couple more. Okay. That's the actions of the Dremel drill. Bob would go out there, and that's his own tombstone, Skid for Skidmore. The supervisor of Treeboard is Robert spelled backwards when he had to name the road. They named it Treeboard Trail. Bob again said, well, sometimes I get a little backwards. So Bob's under there. Mark Reinhardt, who lives next door and was once married to his daughter Lee, remained awesome friends with him, and will probably finish putting in the 2022 one of these days. Granny is Bob's mother, Aiken's wife. Little Train was sort of a mistake because the Dutch word for her name, train, is sort of pronounced like train. So they all got it in their heads that it meant little train. It doesn't, it means little girl in Dutch. So that's his grandmother's, or his mother's tombstone. Bob has 3 wives and his dog. The top stone is, the top stone has the ashes of Bob and his favorite dog of many, many years underneath it. The next stone down is that of wife number 1, Jane Drury, the mother to his kids, Jay and Lee. The next stone down is wife number 2, Evelyn Sherman, who died tragically in a car accident in 1984. And Mrs. Sutton was driving the car, and she survived, and Bob never spoke to the Suttons ever again. The next stone down is for still living wife number 3, Janet Losey, who he hopes will join the clan when she too passes away. If Bob's father were alive, he would publish this picture in a round table, I think, and probably put this caption: "The moral of this photograph is, keep your wives close, but your dog closer." This last one is the Felix and Olga Kirshner burying ground, which probably no one but me, maybe Brad and Louise and Langdon and Susan might know about, because this all came up for sale about the time when we were all looking for first houses in Millbrook. It had been Olga Kirshner's dream, and her husband Felix as well, to own a country home where they could garden, grow vegetables, the table, and entertain friends away from the hustle of New York City life. Their life in 546 Amsterdam Avenue in the city was a rewarding one, but something about being drawn to a country life was magnetic. Olga had grown a small West Side beautician shop into a very successful business, patronized by society matrons who loved her creations and chatter. Felix was equally successful as a hotelier, managing the Sulgrave Hotel on Park Avenue, a rival to the Plaza in the Waldorf Astoria. With their savings, they purchased a charming 1850s house on Hibernia Road in September 1943. They named their country estate Crossways. Since both were only about 5 feet 4 inches tall, they didn't mind that some of the ceiling heights topped out at only 7 feet. Felix died on July 1954 in the Presbyterian Hospital in Newark. During the 11 years they had lived at the house, they planted large vegetable and flower gardens, learned how to can and preserve foods, purchased several freezers to hold meat purchased from surrounding farms, and made a haven of the place for their dogs and cats. Olga decided she wanted to stay in the house, and she wanted to have her husband remain with her. The Kirshners were Jewish, and Olga abided by the Jewish custom of a quick burial after death. She purchased a wooden coffin for him, as Jewish law prescribed that the coffin must be all wood, no metal of any sort, including nails, screws, iron handles, and the box must be designed to deteriorate quickly into the earth, along with a decomposing, unembalmed body. Holes might even have been driven in the bottom of the box to speed this process along. Did she bury Felix in the Temple Bethel Cemetery? No, he was buried in the western meadow of the house, where she could look out over him for the rest of her life. No marker was placed over him, as she knew exactly where he was. She could think of no better resting place for him than at the place they both loved and were at their happiest. As she aged, Alzheimer's unfortunately claimed her mind and the ability to live a normal life. With no relatives alive to look after her, she fell apart. Her once spotless house was not cleaned in any way for almost 2 decades. Where you once could eat off her floors, now they were covered with a layer of grease and pet filth. One winter, I know you're in suspense. One winter, she slipped and fell on the ice, and for several days she lay comatose and helpless outside. Her body temperature dropped so low that the neighbor who found her, estimated 2 or 3 days later, thought she was deceased. She wasn't. She was basically in almost a state of hibernation or suspended animation. She was brought to the hospital, restored to life, and had to be committed to a Westchester hospice for the rest of her life. The social services entered Olga's house. They were horrified. Olga had been a pet lover, taking in abandoned animals, but her Alzheimer's was so bad that all her animals died one after one after one. Social services found 37 dead cats and dogs all over the house. The floors and walls were saturated with animal excrement. Peter Wing, our local genius architect and artist, suggested getting a stink-removing bomb from the US Navy, as such a device was used to effectively aerate submarines after 80 sweaty men had been locked inside for 3 or 4 months. The house had to be sold to pay for Olga's care, and her conservator, Westchester attorney George Vogel, found a buyer. As part of the sales stipulations, George asked the purchaser, upon Olga's death, allow her to be buried in the meadow where her husband slept. The purchaser, a wonderful fellow, thought this was a beautiful romantic gesture and agreed. The purchaser was in real estate himself, and he had initially tried to sell it to his good friends, Langdon and Susan Brown, and their relatives, Susan, or Louise and Brad Roller. After this salesman, who was so good at his job, with trying to convince Louise and Brad, he went home and was kicking himself, saying, "Oh, I hope they don't buy it. I hope they don't buy it." Of course, if they had said yes, they would have been the purchasers. But luckily for me, who was the purchaser, they said no. Anyway, social services luckily were the ones who took away the dead animals, but I did find one more on the porch for a total of 38. And I put a lot of money into restoring it and then sold it to build the house that I have now. 3 weeks ago, I visited the house to ask the owners if they had any photos of the Kirschners that I had left behind in the house for subsequent owners. Ken and Kathy Fleck told me no. They had just purchased the house the day before, and this was their very first day in the house. I then told them that I had purchased the house in 1983 and revealed to them that Felix and Olga were buried down in their meadow. They took it in great stride and now have a great story to tell friends and relatives. Who knows if Felix and Olga might appear to them on Samhain. But as they were Jewish and Samhain, as it used to be called, or Samhain as it should be called, or Halloween as most of you call it, is for pagans and Christians, not Jews. So that's my little talk on the cemeteries of Millbrook.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, that was that's the way the meadow looks now with